You walk in the front door after school today, and nothing happens. No smell of something warm on the stove, no sound from the kitchen, no voice calling your name from the next room. Now picture walking through that same door in 1965. The afternoon had a shape to it, a sequence. It started the moment you hit that porch, and almost every American kid followed roughly the same one. These are 15 after-school routines every American kid had in the 1960s, and most of us have completely forgotten. Number 15, the after-school snack at the kitchen counter. You came through the back door and you dropped your bag. Not by the front door, not in the hallway, but by the back door, because that was where kids came in. And the first thing that hit you was not a screen or a silence. It was a smell. Something on the stove already going, a pot with the lid slightly ajar, and someone in that kitchen, almost without exception. It was not a big production. Nobody called it a snack ritual or made it into an occasion. It was just what happened. Mum had something ready, or Grandma did, or you knew exactly which cabinet to open and what you would find there. Graham crackers, peanut butter spread thick on white bread, apple slices on a plate, sometimes with a little salt. A glass of whole milk poured before you even sat down. You did not eat standing over the sink the way people do now. You sat, even if only for 10 minutes. The kitchen had a specific late afternoon light to it, a warmth that came partly from the stove and partly from the fact that the room was inhabited. Someone was always in there at that hour, moving around, stirring something, asking how your day was in a way that did not require much of an answer. That snack was a bridge. It was the gap between the noise of school and whatever came next. And the food itself was almost beside the point. What mattered was the presence of someone in that kitchen when you came through the door. By the 1970s and into the 1980s, that presence was disappearing. Both parents working, kids coming home to empty houses, snacks becoming something you unwrapped from a package alone. The food got more colorful, and the kitchen got quieter, and something small but real went with it. Every week we go back into the rooms, routines, and forgotten details that made American homes feel more alive than they do today. Subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one. Number 14, changing out of your school clothes the moment you got home. You weren't allowed to sit down in your school clothes. You weren't allowed to go outside in them either. This was not a suggestion. If you tried, your mother caught it within about 30 seconds, and the correction was swift and final. The logic was completely practical. School clothes cost money. They were meant to last the week. You didn't drag them through a game of kickball or let them pick up the smell of an afternoon in the yard. As soon as you came in after the snack, sometimes during it, you went upstairs and you changed. There was a whole system to it. School clothes came off and got hung up or folded depending on the household. Play clothes were already waiting. A pair of worn jeans, a soft t-shirt, shoes that had long since stopped being presentable for anything outside the neighborhood. The physical transition was real. You could feel it. The stiffness of a school day peeling away with the clothes, the looseness of the afternoon settling in. What this created, without anyone naming it, was two distinct versions of the day. The public version, the one you wore to school, and the private version, the one that belonged to the house. That boundary was considered worth maintaining, worth the small daily inconvenience of an outfit change. Today, that line barely exists. Kids wear the same clothes from morning to midnight. Cheaper fabric, fewer rules, no particular distinction between the self you show the world and the one you bring home. Something was solved by that simplicity. Something else was quietly lost. Number 13, doing homework at the kitchen table. There was no homework room. There was no desk in a quiet corner with a door that closed. There was the kitchen table, and that was where you sat. Books spread out across the same surface where dinner would be in 2 hours. Pencils sharpened at the little sharpener mounted to the side of a cabinet. The kind that left a small spiral of wood on the floor if you weren't careful. You could hear your mother at the stove from where you sat. Pot lids rattling, the low sound of the radio, the smell of onions going into something, which meant dinner was real and coming. Nobody worried about focus. Nobody worried about whether the ambient noise of a working kitchen was going to ruin your concentration. It didn't. The kitchen was simply where life happened, and homework was part of life. So it happened there too. You were in the room. You were visible. If you hit something you couldn't solve, you looked up and asked. And there was someone there to ask. That kitchen table kept children inside the household even when they were doing their own work. You were not isolated in your room with a screen. You were not alone with a problem. You were at the center of the house, in the warmest and brightest room, surrounded by the evidence that the day was continuing and dinner was coming and the world was in reasonable order. What replaced it was a bedroom door and eventually a laptop and eventually the total disappearance of any common workspace. More private, more focused supposedly, more alone, definitely. Number 12. Pulling a volume off the encyclopedia shelf when you needed to look something up. There was a shelf in the living room, or sometimes along a wall in the hallway, and it held the encyclopedia set. A full run of matching volumes, lettered on the spines. Britannica, World Book, Compton's. Bought usually as a set, usually as a significant purchase. The kind families paid for over time and felt the weight of owning. When homework hit a wall, that's where you went. You didn't search anything. You pulled the right volume, C for Civil War, S for Solar System, M for Mammal, and you opened it, and you found the entry, and you read it. And then, because the entry sat surrounded by other entries, you often read those too. That was the thing about encyclopedias that nobody mentions anymore. They created accidental knowledge. You looked up one thing, and you came away knowing 3 things, because the page you opened had neighbors. The smell of the binding was specific. So were the onion skin pages, thin enough that you could see the ghost of the print from the other side. The diagrams were black and white and detailed in a way that felt authoritative. The maps had colors that have stayed in people's memories for decades. The limitation was real too. The information was frozen. Families used sets from 1952 well into the 1960s, and nobody thought too hard about what had changed in the meantime. The yearbook supplements tried to patch that, but they were thin comfort. When CD-ROMs arrived and then the internet, the encyclopedia went almost overnight. Now you have access to more information than any household ever dreamed of, and yet you look up exactly what you need, read only that, and close the tab. The adjacency is gone. The accidental education is gone. What's there instead is faster and more complete and somehow flatter. Number 11, playing outside until someone called you in. Once homework was done, or sometimes before it started, the back door opened and you went out. And that was it. No check-ins, no schedules, no organized activity waiting for you. You walked out, you found whoever else had walked out, and you figured out what to do from there. The neighborhood in the 1960s was full of kids doing the same thing at the same time every afternoon. It was its own spontaneous society. Someone had a ball, someone else had a bike, someone had a half-formed idea for a game that nobody had played before and might never play again. You negotiated, you argued, you figured it out, and you played until the light started to fade. The signal to come in was not a phone notification. It was a voice from a porch, or a dinner bell if your family had one, or simply the sky getting the wrong color and the understanding that arriving home after dark was not something you did. Every kid in the neighborhood knew the unwritten time. You came in when you were supposed to come in, and you knew when that was without being told. What ended this was not one thing. Traffic got worse. Neighborhoods changed. The cultural anxiety around children being unsupervised arrived and never really left. Organized activities moved in and filled the afternoon hours with structure. And then screens arrived, and the kids who might have gone out simply did not. What those outdoor hours produced, the boredom management, the negotiation skills, the capacity to invent something from nothing, turned out to be harder to replicate than anyone expected. You can't schedule the thing that unstructured time produces. That's the whole point of it. You came back inside and there was a window, one program, maybe an hour, American Bandstand or the Mickey Mouse Club, or whatever the local station ran in the late afternoon cartoon block. It aired when it aired. You were there or you missed it. There was no other option. The television itself was in the living room. One set for the whole house. The tubes took a moment to warm up and the picture came in slowly, resolving from nothing into something. You turned the channel dial. It clicked satisfyingly through the positions, and you adjusted the antenna, which was always a small negotiation with physics. Someone sat on the couch, someone sat on the floor, closer than they were supposed to be. A parent might be in the room with laundry to fold. The discipline this format imposed was invisible but real. 1 hour, maybe less, then off because dinner was coming and the television was not the point of the evening. It was a specific small thing at a specific small time. You watched the same show as every other kid in the neighborhood, which meant you had something to talk about at school the next day, which meant the shared experience went somewhere. Cable ended this. VCR machines softened it. Streaming finished it completely. Now there is no fixed time, no shared broadcast, and no moment when every kid in America is watching the same thing and feeling the same thing at the same time. What replaced it is technically superior in every measurable way, and it creates almost none of the same connective tissue. Somewhere in the kitchen, on the refrigerator, or on the inside of a cabinet door, somewhere visible, there was a list. It had your name, days next to your name, and tasks next to those days. Monday was trash, Wednesday was sweeping, Thursday was feeding the dog and bringing in the mail. The list did not ask for your opinion. This was not a punishment or a burden, or at least it was not framed that way. It was simply how the household worked. Children were contributors, not guests. The house required daily maintenance from everyone in it, and that included the kids. The expectation was so consistent that it did not really register as an imposition. It was just Tuesday, and on Tuesday you took out the trash. The sensory memory of this is surprisingly specific for a lot of people. The particular weight of a broom handle, the bang of the trash can lid, the sound of silverware being pulled from the drying rack and sorted into the drawer. These were small daily acts, and they added up to something. A household that functioned because multiple people were responsible for pieces of it, not because one person was running the whole operation alone. What changed was partly affluence, partly smaller families, and partly a cultural turn toward protecting children from domestic labor in ways previous generations would have found genuinely puzzling. The chore chart disappeared from a lot of refrigerators. The work did not disappear with it. It just moved back to the parents, mostly the mothers, who absorbed it silently into already long days. Number 8. Setting the dinner table before anyone asked you to. One chore was consistent, regardless of what day it was or whose name was on the list. Before dinner, someone set the table. Setting the table was not a casual gesture. It had a sequence. Place the placemat down first. Center the plate on the placemat. Put the fork to the left. Put the knife to the right, blade facing inward and the spoon outside the knife. Fold the napkin or at minimum place it. Position the glass above the knife. If there is a butter dish, put it in the middle. If there is a bread basket, do the same. You do this in a specific order, and the order is not arbitrary. The child assigned knew the sequence without being told. A parent cooking at the stove could see the table from where they stood and know at a glance whether it had been done correctly. There was a standard, and it was visible. What a properly set table did, practically and emotionally, was announce that dinner was real, that it was coming, that the household was about to stop and gather. The table in its set state declared something. This is a meal, not just food, and this family is about to sit down together and have it. That table is still there in a lot of homes. What is gone is the set standard, the assigned task, the expectation that a child would handle it without prompting. Plates go from the stove to the couch now, or from the microwave directly to wherever people happen to be. Nobody sets a TV tray with the same intention. Something small but real went with that ritual. Number 7, answering the kitchen telephone when it rang. There was one telephone in most houses. It sat on the kitchen counter or it was mounted directly to the wall, usually near the doorway, at a height that worked for adults and required kids to stretch slightly. It was not your phone. It was not anyone's phone. It was the household phone, and when it rang, whoever was closest answered it. You picked it up and you said hello. If the call was for your mother, you said, "One moment, please," and you went and found her. If it was for your father and he was not home yet, you wrote down the message. There was a pad next to the phone for exactly this purpose and a pencil on a string, and you wrote the name and the number and left it where it would be seen. The cord was a coiled thing that stretched just far enough to carry the handset around the corner into the dining room if you needed a little privacy. Not far enough to take it anywhere that really counted as private. Conversations happened in the kitchen or just outside it, in earshot of whatever else was going on. What this created was something almost impossible to describe to someone who grew up with a personal device. The household telephone made children participants in the family's social world. You knew who called. You knew which neighbor checked in on Tuesdays. You took messages and passed them along, and in doing so, you were woven into the web of relationships that held the household together. The mobile phone dismantled all of that quietly and completely. Now each person in the house is their own communications island, more private, more personal, more separate in ways nobody quite planned for. The mailbox was checked every single afternoon. This was often a child's job, and it was done with a particular combination of duty and low-level anticipation because you never entirely knew what was in there. What arrived was physical. Bills in envelopes, letters from relatives written by hand, magazines the family actually read, and the catalogs, Sears, Montgomery Ward, JCPenney, thick as a paperback novel full of everything the family might want or consider wanting. Those catalogs were not junk mail, they were reading material. You brought them inside and they sat on the kitchen table and got browsed that same afternoon. Pages turned, things circled, things pointed out to whoever was nearby. The sensory experience is specific and recoverable for almost anyone who lived it. The smell of fresh ink on paper, the heft of a full catalogue, the feel of a handwritten envelope, the slight texture of someone else's pen pressed into the paper. These were physical objects that arrived daily and required a human being to carry them from the street into the house. When email replaced letters and e-commerce replaced catalogs and automatic payments replaced paper bills, the mailbox emptied out. The ritual of checking the mail persists in a lot of households. The substance of it is mostly gone. Number 5. Reading the afternoon newspaper spread out on the living room floor. Many American cities in the 1960s had two papers, a morning edition and an afternoon one. The afternoon paper arrived after school, dropped on the porch by a paperboy with a route and a schedule. It belonged to the whole household, and everyone had a section. You went for the comics first, always. You spread the paper on the living room floor, lay on your stomach and read Peanuts, Dennis the Menace, and Beetle Bailey. The newsprint smell was specific and strong. The ink came off on your fingers. The broadsheet was wide enough that holding it open properly required both arms fully extended. Somewhere behind you, a parent sat in a chair with the front page. Another section sat folded on the arm of the couch, waiting. The paper moved around the room in pieces. Somebody finished the sports section and passed it over. The household's shared relationship with the news was happening in one room, from one object at one time. That is the thing that is almost impossible to reconstruct now. Everyone under that roof read the same news on the same day from the same source. When you talked about something at dinner, you were working from the same set of facts. The personalized feed made that structurally impossible. The comics section on the living room floor was a child's entry into the shared information life of the family. That entry point is gone. At some point between 5 and 6 in the evening, you heard it. A car in the driveway, footsteps on the porch, the specific sound of a key in the front door lock, and the household shifted. Your father came home from work at a predictable time. The coat came off at the door. The briefcase went down. Kids who were smart about it were already in good shape, changed, with homework at least started and chores done. Being caught unprepared at 5:30 was its own small failure. What followed was a brief exchange. How was your day? What's for dinner? Short questions with short answers, genuine ones, happening in person in the kitchen. And then the evening began in earnest. The house felt different once everyone was in it. Complete. The day had been a dispersal. Kids to school, father to work, and the evening was a reassembly. Everyone accounted for. That daily reassembly gave children something hard to name but easy to feel in its absence. The sense that the day had a shape, that someone was always going to come home. Longer commutes thinned this out. Irregular hours dissolved it. What replaced it is people filtering into the house at different times, moving to different rooms, checking different devices. The house fills up gradually. Nobody notices the moment it becomes full. Number 3, sitting down to dinner at the same time every night. The kitchen timer went off and that was it. You came from wherever you were and you sat down. Same time every night, somewhere between 5:30 and 6 o'clock, and there was no version of events in which you did not. The food came out in serving dishes. There was a main and vegetables and bread and something to drink, all prepared from scratch by someone who had started cooking around 4:30. This was not a special occasion meal. This was Tuesday. The table was where the day got processed. You talked about what happened at school, you heard about work in simplified form, you argued about small things. The television was not on. The dinner table was its own thing and the television was another thing. In most 1960s households, the two did not overlap. What this produced night after night was a family that knew each other. Not in the abstract, but concretely. You knew what your father's week was like. You knew what your sister was worried about. The family dinner was the most efficient daily information sharing system the household had, and nobody called it that because it was just dinner. When takeout normalized and schedules fractured and devices arrived at the table, that daily non-negotiable ritual dissolved, and with it went a particular kind of knowing that only repetition produces. Number 2, doing the dishes together before anyone did anything else. The meal ended, the plates were still warm, and a system went into motion. Someone cleared, someone washed, someone dried. Everyone knew their position. There was no dishwasher in many homes in the 1960s, or if there was one, it was not used for every meal. Dishes got done by hand at the sink, which meant hot water and soap, the squeak of a clean plate, and dish towels worn completely soft from washing. The steam came off the rinse water. Somebody's hands got too hot, and they said so. Nothing else happened until the dishes were done. No television, no going back outside, no phone calls. The kitchen got cleaned first, and then the evening open. This meant that the noisiest, most cooperative 10 minutes of the day happened right after dinner, when everyone was still in the same room, hands busy, guards down. People talk more easily when they are doing something with their hands. The dishes conversation was often the most honest one of the day. You said things at the sink that you would not have said at the table. The work gave you somewhere to look that was not directly at the person you were talking to. The dishwasher solved a real problem and created a quiet one. The kitchen cleared faster. The evening opened sooner. And the 10 minutes when the family stood at the sink and talked just stopped happening. Number 1, the bedtime ritual that ended every single day the same way. At 8 o'clock or 8:30 for older kids, the day formally ended. Not wound down, ended. There was a bath or a wash up at the sink, pajamas from a drawer that held only pajamas, the specific smell of soap in the bathroom, and then bed at the time you were supposed to be in bed, and the light went off. The time was not negotiated. A parent came in briefly to check, to say goodnight, sometimes to read a few pages to a younger child, and then the room went dark. From the next room you could hear the low sound of the television, the adults having their own hour. You understood, without anyone explaining it, that the day had a formal end, and this was it. The objects of this ritual are the ones people remember most clearly. The weight of a wool blanket, the cool of a pillow not yet slept on, the glass of water on the nightstand, the dark of a room with curtains drawn, the muffled sound of the world continuing without you, which was somehow comforting rather than lonely. What the fixed bedtime gave children was the same thing all these routines gave them, stated most plainly. The day has a shape. It begins a certain way, moves through certain things, and ends at a certain point, and tomorrow it will do the same. Screens in the bedroom dissolved this. Irregular schedules thinned it out. What replaced the fixed lights out was children managing their own wind down, staying up until they happened to fall asleep, more autonomous and lying awake longer in more houses than the generation before them ever did. Here is what's worth noticing about all of this. None of these routines were designed. Nobody engineered an optimal after-school sequence for American children. These things existed because they worked. They fed people, cleaned kitchens, got homework done, and kept houses running. But they also worked in a deeper sense that only becomes visible when you look at what replaced them. The after-school hours of a 1960s kid were not free time the way we think of free time now. They were a structured, human-scale passage from the public world of school back into the private world of family. Each routine was a small handoff. The snack was the decompression. The clothes change was the transition. The homework was the bridge. The chores were the contribution. The dinner was the gathering. The dishes were the conversation. The bedtime was the close. Taken together, they formed something, a daily architecture that placed children inside the life of the household rather than parallel to it. They answered the phone for everyone. They brought in the mail for everyone. They set the table for everyone. The household included them in its operation. And that inclusion, unremarkable at the time and invisible in the doing, turned out to be one of the more important things it gave them. These routines did not fail. They dissolved because the world around them changed. Schedules changed. Both parents working changed what 4 p.m. looked like in a kitchen. Cheaper clothes changed the logic of an outfit swap. The dishwasher changed the 10 minutes at the sink. The mobile phone changed who answered when the household was called. Each individual change made sense. Added up, they produced afternoons that are quieter, more private, more efficient, and less inhabited than the ones that came before. Picture a kid coming through a back door in 1965. Bag dropped in the corner. A voice from the kitchen asking how the day was. Something on the stove already going. Outside until the light went wrong. Dinner at 6 every night. Dishes after, all of them together. Bed at 8 with the television drifting in from the next room. Nobody thought that was remarkable. It was just Tuesday. It was just how afternoons worked. And for a very long time, in a very large number of houses, it was exactly enough.